Hey everyone, Tyler here at The Movie Beat. Thanks for joining me on another video, and this one is going to be a continuation of my Korean movies science fiction series. I've really been dedicating this entire month of January to revisiting or even watching for the first time a lot of past sci-fi efforts that have come out of South Korean cinema as I gear up, hype up, but keep my expectations in check for the new Space Sweeper set to drop on February 5th on Netflix. So I think those fans, us, of Korean cinema can safely say that the sci-fi genre does have some room for improvement within Korean film history, but sci-fi is definitely one of my favorite genres, so it's one that I am rooting for very strongly. I do think there are some gems, as well as some pretty big failures in the history of Korean cinema. So if you guys watched my Volume 2 of the sci-fi series, Future Tech, Cyber Cities, and Robots, there were two films in that one, both Natural City and Resurrection of the Little Match Girl, that were released around the same time as the two films that I'm going to be talking about in this video. So that was 2002, 2003-ish. And unfortunately, I think the relative failure at the box office, at least domestically for those films, kind of set the tone for the industry moving forward and just how they approached sci-fi projects in general, whether they shelved them, abandoned them altogether. And I think that's unfortunate because a lot of these films were just so ambitious, and I look back on them and I think just, God, they were so awesome as a starting point for science fiction in Korean films. So the two that I'm going to be looking at in this one both deal with similar themes of time and memory. So I'm calling this episode Past or Future. And one of the films I really, really liked, and another one not so much. So the films I'm going to be looking at are 2009, Lost Memories, as well as Yesterday. Both of them came out in 2002. You can guess right now, maybe you already know which one I liked a lot more, or maybe you'll be surprised. Here we go. I want to start with 2009 Lost Memories. There's a lot that could be said about this movie and just reasons why it didn't do so well, but I do feel that 2009 Lost Memories was probably one of the first Korean nationalistic rallying cry type movies that can be amplified from that kind of post-Japanese occupation trauma that is still very strongly felt by Koreans here. It's something that I did not know about so much until I came here, but that emotion and the sensitivity is still very strong. And so when I first saw this one not long after it came out, way over my head, I really even could not tell the difference that much between the Japanese and the Korean language that was being spoken, just audibly. So I'm just reading the subtitles and whatnot, and I was pretty lost. So this one, most of it is in Japanese, and it has to do with the story. So let me give you guys a quick rundown on how this one plays out. The synopsis, mostly spoiler-free, but after that, I'll give you some more thoughts in my review on the film. So the prevention of one man's assassination in 1909 triggers a ripple effect through time that changes major historical events to set up an alternate reality in 2009. This new history includes the United States teaming up with Japan during World War II, where the atomic bombs were actually dropped on Germany, as well as Japan entering the UN to become a major world power and ultimately ended up pioneering the space race. This also means that Japan's annexation of Korea, or Joseon as it was known then, never ended. Thus, the Korean peninsula effectively became Japan, so downtown Seoul looks a lot like downtown Tokyo in 2009. And the opening shots of this one, pretty impressive if you guys are familiar with Seoul as a city. Some of the major downtown points just completely washed in Japanese culture and style and everything. Everything's written in Japanese. So I think what I was mentioning a little bit earlier about some of the sensitivity towards the even current relationship between Korea and Japan, a lot of it based on the true history and still very sensitive. These opening shots, this is like nightmare scenario for a lot of Korean people, and I just cannot help but think like the emotion that this kind of stirs in people, maybe a little bit of anger as they're watching this, is not something that you want to see if you're Korean. Again, I think a lot of Western audience, foreign audience, not very familiar with the historical aspect here, think just like, whoa, cool concept, interesting concept to think about. So that was kind of a different with my experience with the film now, reviewing it. So with Korean culture having virtually disappeared and the public interest in the old heritage and the land at an all-time low, those who still retain their pride and allegiance to Joseon find themselves as resistance fighters, resorting to acts of terrorism to make their voices heard. So if you guys have seen other films like Assassination, there's this concept or this real thing called resistance fighters, and a lot of them were in hiding, civilian soldiers. Some of them were based in like northern Korea or Manchuria, China area. They have their own operations, and their plan is to basically get their country back. And this movie kind of takes that concept and extends it into the future, as in, you know, they never got Korea liberated, so they still have these fighters, and it's like generation after generation. So it's a pretty cool concept, I must say. So as the most notorious resistance fighter organization, or it would be called a terrorist organization in 2009, continues to crash Japanese cultural events and assassinate high-profile figures, ace counter-terrorism negotiators, the ethnic Korean-speaking Sakamoto, played by Jang Dong-gun, and the native Japanese Saigo, played by Nakamura Toru, are brought in to help seek a resolution. Of course, with the ethnic Korean Sakamoto hearing that this terrorist is doing the moral thing by fighting to retake his country, he's clearly emotionally stirred by the words he just hears. And if we're to believe that he's really the only one capable of understanding Korean in this big bunch of people situation, even with this terrorism threat having lasted years and years and years, they still, like the Japanese police forces, and I think this is very intentional, and it's kind of something that you're going to see in a lot of movies that are kind of portraying the Japanese in this way. They're not very bright, and they can't really connect the dots. Like, they just think these people are kind of a nuisance, annoying, like they need to get over it. They're not really clear on why are they doing this. So that was kind of frustrating. So he does not decide to share what he heard the terrorists say, and he sort of leaves those problems to stir within himself. And so I'm thinking, I'm like, all right, I know exactly how this movie's gonna play out. He's gonna somehow take the side of the resistance fighters, or he's going to turn a blind eye to his police work, and he's gonna help get Korea back. So there better be some story surprises, because it's very clear that that's how this one's gonna go. Thankfully, there are some very intriguing X-Files type ways of centering the terrorist activity around the heists of ancient artifacts associated with this ancient religions, and these artifacts having mystical properties that are rumored to be capable of opening doorways through time. So that to me was the coolest aspect of the story. I wish they focused a lot more on that, like X-Files type opening doorways and time travel. This one definitely would have probably made a very good Netflix series. Again, but this is way before Netflix and all that. But hey, this one was based on a novel, so it could still happen, I think. And with this movie's concept having Korea be virtually Japan and everything being spoken in Japanese and trying to make it as authentically Japanese as possible, this is one thing that went over my head when I first saw it. As I said, I could not tell the difference between the languages very well, and I'm just reading the English white subtitles, but I think we can all agree that, you know, something like Park Chan-wook's The Handmaiden expertly did the subtitles in a way that the Japanese was done in one color and the Korean was done in another color. And if that was done in this one, I think it really could enhance the experience for everybody, because if you have seen The Handmaiden and you were, you know, watching it with those subtitles, I think we all know just how important it is for a quick language change in a scene to really help control information flow between characters, or whether they're going to emphasize certain dramatic points. It is so essential to know which language is being spoken. And this was one of those films where it really, really makes a difference. So this film also does have a sort of TV drama vibe at times, and there are a few awkwardly staged and overplayed action sequences that stretch the limits of believability that really took me out of the movie at times. But overall, the back and forth tactical shootouts using the high-tech weaponry is mostly very engaging. 2009, though, is overly long at 2 hours and 15 minutes, and there's a bit of an unusual pacing to the movie that sees peaks of intense violence and action intertwined with slower, melodramatic character building scenes that remind me of similar films of its time, like Shiri, but I do think this one was more in its element, during those slower moments, so since the action sequences come across as a bit uninspired. And I think that's because during this time, a lot of Korean cinema was still trying to imitate the Hollywood blockbuster to some degree rather than find its own voice and style. So some parts, this one feels kind of like a goofy buddy cop movie, with the way that a lot of the action was staged. And I was like, this does not fit at all. Like, clearly they're like watching, some scene and trying to recreate it. So I did not like that. I really wish this one explored more of its supernatural side, because that is the strongest point of this film. So I'm gonna rate this one a 4 out of 10. One thing I do want to note, that this one did predict in one of the timelines a unified Korea in 2008, and this one came out in 2002. So that has not come to be. So perhaps somebody has time traveled and changed the future. So if we could get that corrected somehow and get this place unified, that would be great. Thanks. So the next one I'm going to be talking about is called Yesterday. It was directed by Jung Yoon-soo, and it stars Kim Seung-woo and Kim Yun-jin. And I really want to just start by saying this one rocked my socks off. I loved it. It's one of those movies that you will not find a lot of great things said about it online or written places. However, maybe if you're like me, this one might just be my personal style and feeling towards films. It just worked for me so well. I really appreciate how this film does not try to hold my hand through its story, because this one just drops you off right in the middle of its world amidst this ongoing conflict that the viewer knows really nothing about. So in this way, it can be either very confusing or intriguing if you like to try and figure out things on your own. There are lots of different characters that just appear without any explanation, with their own unique personalities and looks. So for me, I so looked forward to get to know each and every one of them on whatever adventure was going to be unfolding. So I want to get into the story synopsis just here real quick, and then I'll give you some more thoughts on Yesterday. During an ongoing investigation into a series of at least 5 murders, all being linked to the same killer within the course of just 1 year, authorities have grown desperate to catch the mysterious culprit as peace and safety on a now unified Korea drops to a new low. As they begin to exhaust all available resources and manpower in pursuing leads, an emerging theory called genetic determinism that claims the propensity to commit violent crime can be linked to certain genetic traits becomes a promising step towards establishing a world without such violent crimes. But when an international conference covering this very topic is hijacked by a fringe group of terrorists that sees the chief of police kidnapped, a strange necklace linked to the serial murders is also found within the police chief's belongings put on display by the kidnappers. With the kidnapping of the police chief and the serial murders now related to an organized group of extremists, the investigation takes a giant new turn as the lead investigator, Suk, played by Kim Seung-woo, begins to embrace a bold new theory of genetic determinism pioneered by the police chief's own daughter, a forensic analyst and key spokeswoman at the conference he was abducted from. Working alongside law enforcement, investigators utilize all available advanced technology and new genetic profiling techniques to identify the serial criminals and get the police chief back safely. So I personally enjoyed the styling and costumes of the various investigators, agents, as well as the criminals in this one. They each had a distinct look that was both futuristic and cool looking that added to their personalities. The future design of the city was also very well realized, and there are many great on-location shots. The environments were superbly done throughout. I just cannot say how much I enjoyed watching this. To me, this one is one of the better Korean sci-fi films, just based on the fact of its look. It looks so uniquely Korean. Sometimes perps emerge a little too conveniently for the investigators to follow, which sometimes comes across as lazy writing, but it's somewhat understandable in this one because its scope is just so broad. It probably would have been a 4-hour movie if they had connected every dot super clearly. The character played by Kim Yun-jin, who you've probably seen in House of the Disappeared or Shiri, she's the forensic analyst and the kidnapped police chief's daughter. When she joins the dangerous field investigative work, it might be a bit of a stretch for some, but I think it comes across as quite fitting, actually, considering the character's personal investment in the case. I thought it was also great for her character to have been written to have at least undergone some kind of basic training to have her wielding a gun and all too. She adds a really nice balance, and she looks great alongside the lead detective, and just is a great team member in general because she gives a lot of cool, deep insight into the psychology of the serial killer at large. And while the action is mostly good at a distance, some of the car chases and hand-to-hand fights can be a bit hard to follow at times due to how it was shot and a lot of close-ups, which is usually used to mask a lot of rough choreography. There's also an interesting narrative curveball the film throws halfway into it that addresses secret government research projects akin to MK Ultra, as well as a human cloning subplot that was pretty interesting as a sci-fi concept to explore. So this one does get a lot of flack for being very confusing, hard to follow, too many characters. And yes, this one you really have to put your thinking cap on and stay focused literally from the first shot. I always like to try to catch every frame. I don't even try to blink while I'm watching movies, but again, I appreciate this film for not showing all of its cards even by the credits, because I want to kind of figure things out on my own, and the movie does give you enough clues. It's just like you might have to rewatch it to pick them all up. That's one of the things that I think makes a great film is repeat viewings. And if they get more interesting as they go by, it's a stronger product for me overall. So I do think this one shines brightest on its second or third viewing, and I really enjoyed kind of putting the puzzle pieces together. This one is very much in your head with some of its characters and even some of the dialogue. It's not really what people would naturally say. They speak in a lot of I would say poetic language in this one. So for me, that's the style that I'm looking for, especially in the sci-fi genre. So I gotta rate this one as 7.5 out of 10. It's one of those films that a lot of the early bad press, I think a lot of people didn't even give it a try. Here's my copy of Yesterday, the 2-disc special edition. It's pretty cool, but I wish I had a full slip. I had to actually buy this used, so it could have come with a full slip when it first came out, but this is all I got of it. 2009 Lost Memories, I only have the disc available. So that's going to be it for this episode of my Korean movie sci-fi series, Past or Future. Let me know what you guys think of these films, 2009 or Yesterday, in the comments below. I want to know if I'm crazy for loving Yesterday, or maybe I'm crazy for not totally loving 2009. Always open to hear other people's opinions on Korean films. So until next time, I'm Tyler here at The Movie Beat. Keep watching movies.